I'm Gunter Gebauer. I'm professor for philosophy at the Free University of Berlin, Freie Universität. I'm a retired professor, but I'm always continuing teaching at the Philosophical Institute. We started our work together in the 1980s. We got the impression that the concept of mimesis is very important, and there are no new titles, no publications about this concept. There was the old book from Auerbach and several newer books, but no comprehensive presentation of the concept, which seemed to us highly interesting. I came across this concept very early in my life. That was during my studies in comparative literature. We studied with disciples of Adorno, Peter Sondy, Aristotle, and drama theory, old dramas, modern dramas, and there was a key term, mimesis. And I found at first the concept extremely interesting, especially in Aristotle as he develops it, but at the same time very hard to understand. And there are lots of interpretations of this concept. Recently, after we were working on this concept already, there was a wonderful interpretation of Paul Ricoeur, which he adopted. That was a very good philological work on the poetics of Aristotle. And I was very much intrigued by this concept when I was a student, because I tried to unite two careers. I was an athlete, rather good, not first class, but the second one. But at that time I was 21 years old, and I had lots of fine ideas about my athletic career. To say the truth, I did not think of something important in athletics for me, but it was the world of sports which fascinated me. I was from a family of parents who were very interested in sports and the organized sports in my country. So from my childhood on, sports played a very important role in my life. The other important role in my life was drama, theater. I was in a theater group in my university. I liked to go to the theater to watch dramas on stage. So both worlds were rather familiar to me. And then I came across the term of mimesis. That means representation on stage and staging things. That was very important for me. The book of Auerbach was rather fascinating, especially because of the title. Just mimesis. Nobody knew what mimesis was, and Auerbach does not explicitly explain in his book what it is. So I read the book and I did not understand really what he was saying. That was later, when we were working on our book, that I understood fully what was his concern. So Auerbach wrote this book in exile. So he was forced to leave Germany. He went to Turkey and had not his personal books with him. So that is one important reason why this book is, on the one hand, a little bit short in explanation and with examples. On the other hand, very rich, because the examples he chooses are very famous and interesting books or scenes of literary works he chose in Turkey to show how reality is represented. And his main concern was to show that there are two sorts of main representational forms in European literature, or even in the Western literature. The one is the representational form of the Old Testament, which is dramatic and a little bit torn, not so consequent, but highly interesting. And the other is Homer with his epopee, really very different form to represent events in history, or invented history. So that was very important, but it did not really work in the field of literary studies. Auerbach was highly considered because he had written famous books. There was one book which was, for me, very important. There's a sort of sociological study about the Roman literature, about the lectures of Roman literature. So it's a sort of sociological analysis of the public of this literature. That's very, very interesting. The one who has done this later was Pierre Bourdieu. Did the same sort of work, but with tools from sociology. Auerbach did not possess these tools. So that was open to society, this book about the public, but Mimesis was not open to society. It lacks totally. What is in the one book so important, the readership, is not present in the second book, in the Mimesis book. So that was a point which I found highly interesting, to reflect about the Mimesis and how it was received by the readership. The second book tries to show how the concept of mimesis is at work in special social fields and practices, for example. One example is play. Play is in a certain sort of mimesis of society. That was my old idea, that sports reflects the society in which sport is performed. The same thing is with games, say, for example, children games, but also adults games. They reflect the society in which they are played. That's the thesis of Roger Caillois, which I found rather interesting, and we tried to put it at work in this book. And the other subject we have chosen was gesture. So gesture is always a mimetic foundation, because gesture does not represent something special, but it represents the sort of attitude one has to one another. So if I make a gesture to you to come over to me, this gesture and the way it is performed shows my relationship to you, if it's friendly, if it's an invitation, or if it's a sort of command or something like that. So in gestures there's many, many social layers present, and it's a sort of performance of something which one can define, relationship, for example. There are other features present in gestures, like, for example, energy or emotion. So it's a multifaceted social move one does there, and one can consider a gesture as a sort of theatrical performance of a person towards another person. A gesture is a sort of performance of one's state of mind, a state of mood too, a state of emotions. That is a sort of objectivation of what is in my inner. Something it is played, it is performed when I have the intention to be friendly to you, and sometimes it is non-intentionally, then it is just spontaneous. So gesture is related to the expression of emotion, and if you study emotion, what I've done after the work on mimesis, you will quickly find that the emotional expressions are sorts of gestures. They are not exactly gestures in the sense as social gestures like greeting, but more spontaneous, but not freely spontaneous, because we have a certain learned behavior of emotion. And in this sense, emotional behavior is mimetical too. Not so far as, say, theatrical movements, but it's very rare that our, say, for example, pain behavior or behavior of a happy state is completely spontaneous and only marked by our personal feelings. There's always a sort of learned and social attitude in it, because there are emotional expressions which are demanded by society, by our society, for example. If you are very sad about the death of a person you knew very well, it is clear that you have to have a certain behavior of
grief or sadness.
Sadness, yes. Yeah. That was the word I was. Yeah. Well, soccer struck me so much because it's the only team game in which the use of the hand is forbidden. Only for the goalkeeper, but all the other 10 players must not touch the ball with their hands. So that's the highest crime in soccer playing. So my question for me was, why is this so important for this game, and why is it that this game has become the most important game in Europe and in Africa and in South America? Not in North America, it's different. American football, in American football one can use the hands, but not in soccer. So one of my answers is the hand is the most intelligent, perhaps the most skillful part of the body. And soccer is a play in which the bodies of the players are artificially primitive. There's a search for primitivity in football. That's something which is thrilling, because it does not come from the workers' milieu in the society, but from the highest classes in English society, of the public schools. So it was the noblemen and their sons who started to invent and to play soccer and to give the rules. And there was in Eton and in Harrow and rugby that this game was invented. So there the young man invented a game in which their bodies became rather very primitive. So everything which is culture, which goes through the hands, that is painting, writing, eating conveniently, and the gestures and tenderness, for example, love, and all these things, and all the performative things you can do with the hands are forbidden in football. It's only with the feet. And the feet in general, besides the dance, does not play any role in European art history or European culture history. So that was striking for me. And at the same time, it's a charming idea to follow up the development of players when you see how they make their feet skillful. And they fulfill with the feet tasks which in general are fulfilled by the hands. So it's a little bit the world turned round. And this is a little bit like carnival, events like this in European history, when the normal order is reversed and the bottom is at the top and the top is at the bottom. So it's a little bit like this, football. And that I found this very interesting. At the same time, the feet are not so skillful as the hands. You can compare handball and football. A handball match ends 36 points, 36 goals to 32 goals or so. Football is 1-0, 0-0, 1-1, 2-1, and so on and so on. The goals are very rare in football. When there are many goals, that is an exceptional event, which is always discussed in all pubs after that. But in general, this rare thing, a goal, heightens the dramatic and the tension of the play. When one team has marked a goal, that means that the team has a considerable advance, and it's difficult for the other team to come up, and so on. So tension is there, dramatic is there. At the same time, they play with a rather big ball. The handball is very small. A handball player, in general, handball players have very big hands, and they can put the ball in the hand and hold the ball. The other player cannot touch it, so it's very funny in handball. At the same time, it's a little bit ridiculous when you consider football, because with football it's very complicated, very difficult to keep the ball, because you have the ball between your feet, before your feet, and every other player could take it. You cannot possess the ball. Reporters talk sometimes from ball possession and things like this, but that's only metaphoric. No team, no player possesses the ball, and that means there's a big part of chance in football. Even the best football players in the world are not able to score more than 2 2, 3 or 4 times in a match. So they very often they don't succeed with the shot. The representational aspect of football, or of sports in general, modern sport, can be resumed by some traits. Sport, competition sport, is a sport which starts on equal terms, on equal chances. So look at a 100-meter sprint, all the runners are on the same line and they start at the same shot of the starter. So that means equality in the beginning, everybody's equal. It's like modern societies, for example, for voting. Everybody has one vote. And then comes the performance, and the performance, it's the strongest, the best, the person who performs especially well, who is the winner. There's one winner and the others are losers. So that's a trait which you find in modern economic society or economic field. Again, there's one which is the biggest one, so number one, and the others are followers. They're important too, because they are important to make the play go. You need adversary parts, otherwise it is not correct functioning, for example, of the market. They need concurrency. The third point is drama. Competition is drama, it's tension, because it's not known before the starting command who will win. It's open. So everything is going on after the command, and then you can see it. It's visible, and the visibility gives the possibility to show it, for example, at television or in movies and so on. So everybody can watch it, and it's relatively simple. Modern society is not simple at all. So this mimetical representation of modern society is very interesting for a public which does not understand economics, for example. Everybody can understand football in a certain sense. There are specialists who can explain why this and that happened, but that's not necessary for following the game. So it's open to all public. That's, I think, main traits of modern society. So one can refine the analysis, much more points, but I think these points are the most important. It's a sort of democratic society in sports. Mm-hmm. With one performer who is the best one, and always the best. It can happen, but that can happen in politics too. I had lots of crowd experiences, and I have to admit they were not so bad. It was on the football field, for example, on the tribune. I went to, when I was a boy, to my local football team, which I knew a little bit. My mother worked in this club and, for example, gave the monthly pay to the players. So it was a certain close experience I had, and my team was very, for a certain time, very good. And there was a crowd which was enthusiastic, or they were disappointed. I come from North Germany, and there the emotions are changing very, very quickly. So there's enthusiasm, which is unbelievable for northern people, and on the other side there's very, very easily a deception, and the deception is extreme too. Don't like switch off the lights and things like this, you know. But I like this extreme sensitivity to the play, and I liked to be together with others. I was a young boy, 14 years old, 15 years old, and I like this collective emotions. And I found this nice. when our team was good, I have to admit. When the team was bad, there was a shame. So then there was a bad week coming with a bad mood and so on. But in general, the team played well, and there was a sort of euphoria for a whole week. That was an important experience I made, and it continued later when I was a student. There were student movements which were going on. I was in Berlin. I went to Berlin because of this in 1966. Then there were student strikes and students revolts and things like this, and we made the first sit-in and teach-in Europe, in 66. That was very important for everybody who was present. So it started with 500 students and it ended with 2,500 students and professors and assistants in a big event. And one could not forget this moment. And then it's continued in 67 with a very lively debates on democratic structures at the university, and it ended in 68. And then I was in Paris in 68, but just by chance. I did not go to Paris for May 68. I went there in March to visit my girlfriend, and I stayed until until May 68, and I followed the events. So I was very close to it, and I saw the moments of solidarity, of friendship, of celebrations, of festivities, and on the other side, defeat and sorrow and sadness and so on. So I think that was emotional. At the same time, it was a sort of liberation, which was going on. It's a liberation from structures which were old-fashioned in France, especially at the university. In Germany, we had the problem with the old Nazis at the university and in society, who were always in vigor. They had important positions in the society, and even after World War II, they stayed at in important places of the positions of our society. So there was a sort of liberating movement, and it was accompanied by a lot of intellectual work, lots of, I think, also emotional events and friendships and things going on, so that one cannot forget these moments for a whole life. And my idea was crowds are interesting social phenomena which don't fit to other concepts of sociology. They are not the society. They are not only groups. They are not clubs. They are not milieus. They are. You can take every social concept, groups, for example, and you will see it does not fit, because crowds are spontaneous. Suddenly there is a crowd, and the crowd is growing, as Elias Canetti says. But that's not all. In crowds, you feel liberated in the behavior. At the same time, there's a great solidarity between the members of the crowd. And then when the crowd is finished, there's nothing which is left of the social ties, of the social relationships you have during the crowd events. During the crowd events, you have neighbors who are very close to you. And for example, on a football place, members of the crowd, of the fans, they fall in arms and they embrace each other and so on. But when the game is over, everybody goes at home, and one can remember this and that person was standing nearby. But that's all. So there's no social relationship which has a certain durée. It's finished, but it is not forgotten. That's important. There was a crowd event, and the old theories of Le Bon and Tarde maintain that in the crowd moment, the moment of event, the personality of the members of the crowd vanishes. And I think that is not true. Not for modern crowds. It's possible that, for example, for crowds in panic or so, in panic moments, but that's very, very exceptional. When people are running for their life, the normal personality is abolished or is forgotten. A crowd is just, like Le Bon says, a sort of big animal. So, but in crowds which we have experienced since, say, the 60s, I've never seen this sort of moment. I've always seen crowds which are structured by collective emotions, by common events and so on, and by behavior together to the others, which is civilized in general. They are not wild animals suddenly. And when the crowd event is finished, one goes home, and when it's a good event, when you have a success, for example, in students' movement in '66, which was very civilized and educated and so on, we had a certain success in changing the structures of the Free University, so we were very happy. And everybody who was present at that time, if I meet somebody who was there, says, you were there in '66 in May or in June, there was a wonderful event, and so on and so on. So I think it's on the contrary of what say Le Bon and Tarde. The personality is not destructured, but it is restructured. The sort of fortification of the personality, especially when the crowd events were positive. Especially in Germany, there are crowd moments which disturb a lot, because this is not the positive aspect of crowds which I have described. That is only a destructive crowd, because there's no positive attitude in this crowd. It's only negative. It's not even critical, because critics have to be articulate. And in the German movements of the rightist party, extreme rightist party, there's no structured criticism, there's no rational idea in it, there's no proposition of a better way, of a better politics. It's just destruction, and they abandon the standards of normal behavior. I think that's the most important thing, which has changed the public life in Germany a lot since 3 or 4 years, because with the aid of the internet, there are lots of attacks against the politicians in Germany, not only the Chancellor Merkel, but other politicians too, even on the local, or especially on the local level, mayors, deputies, persons who are well known in the neighborhood and do a very good work, and they do this work for the community. They are attacked in a brutal and an absolutely negative and dangerous way. Some people were shot even, others are always under the shock that they receive mails in which it is announced that they will be killed in the next days, and things like this, threats. That is horrible, and I think there's no positive aspect of this crowd behavior. And it's not a crowd which is really very tangible. Sometimes they gather together, but it's not huge crowds. For example, recently there was an assembly of the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland. There were, I think, 700 persons in the street. And there was a demonstration, a manifestation against them. And they were 14,000. Very nice people, just protesting and articulating the protest in a correct manner with arguments and so on. So that was the relationship. These 700 persons were menacing. They were, I think, dangerous for public order, because there are some people who doesn't hesitate to kill a politician, as has happened in Germany. But the 14,000 are Democrats, and they articulate their idea of democratic society. So I think we have two sorts of crowds now in Germany. This articulated crowd with the feeling of good behavior, of correct political answers to threats of the right-wing parties, and the others who have no real idea about politics, they're only negative. And I think if we are looking for common trait of what described Le Bon and Tarde, we have this sort of crowd which we can show.
So I think we're coming towards the end. Maybe the last question is that contrary to the 19th century crowds, which were an assembly of physical people, which are still going on, there is now a transformation in crowd behavior. I don't know if you can call it that still, that is due to the digital technologies.
Yeah.
In which the individual is somehow connected to a multitude. So could you comment on the new crowds?
Well, the new crowds started with the anti-Wall Street movement, and with flash mobs and so on. That means there are some people sitting at their computer, and they're giving signals for many thousands of followers, and they indicate a certain place to assemble, to gather together, and to make a certain action. And this is very precise, to say, for example, on Friday afternoon and so on, or tomorrow, 7 o'clock at this place, we will gather and we will do this and that thing. And then suddenly there are 2,000 people or so who feel invited to come. And the persons who initiate this event do not know these 2,000 or 7,000 people. They have just their addresses in the computer, and they give the message. And this means what is virtual in the internet becomes real. Yeah? Real bodies, 7,000 people gathering at that place, doing certain things, eating all things up which are in a certain shop or so. It becomes a real event. So there's a sort of interface between the internet and the real action, which is completely new. And the most impressive movement of this style was in France with the Gilets jaunes, which started by the action of one or two persons who were upset about the heightening of the prices for petrol, for gas, and they proposed to other persons to take the Gilets jaunes on and together at a certain roundabout at the entry of a city. And this worked at once. That was unbelievable. That I think it took 10 days, and then it was spread over the whole France, and it lasted for a whole year. So I think that's amazing, and it was only possible first by the internet, but it's not all. That is the second point, which is as important as the first one, is that people are ready prepared to take the Gilets jaunes and go out and protest in a very militant way.
Excellent. Lisa, I think the very last question, in the title of your book you have the word individual.
Yeah.
And many of us might say, well, we live in an individual society, each of us is an individual. Can you complicate this view?
Yes. I think many people, well-educated people, the middle classes, are proud to be individuals, and they maintain, I'm an individual, I'm not a crowd person. That's not my thing. And they think of Le Bon and French Revolution or something like this. But when you see, for example, cultural events today, a big exhibition, very important. I think there's always going on at some place in Europe an important art exhibition. Rubens in Cologne, Leonardo da Vinci in Paris, and so on. And there are many, many people who are interested, and they try to have an entry ticket. That's not possible to go there and to buy one. You have to book 1 hour or 2 hours by internet, and then you see there are so many people. There are thousands and thousands of people who go to this museum, who take their cars and go to this place. That arrives very often when there are cultural events which give the idea that you can have, I talk now as a reader of Bourdieu, that you can have a distinctive profit of going there. You're perhaps interested in art, that's possible, but going there, having a ticket, being one of the first persons who come back from Paris and can tell, I've seen the exhibition, which everybody wants to see, that gives you a certain plus in the social ranking. And I think many exhibitions in art are considered in this way, not in a very strict sense or simple sense that I go to a certain show and I consider myself as better as the other. That's too simple. But I'm an educated man. I am interested in art and art history, and I go everywhere where there's important exhibitions in Europe, and this is the most important, so I have to go there. That's clear. It's not my sense that I have to go to Rubens. I personally don't like Rubens, not so much, so I prefer other exhibitions. But now it's in Cologne, and thousands of people waiting outside to come in, and suddenly Rubens becomes an extraordinary painter, which he is, but for the public of our days. So I think these people who form a crowd, objectively a crowd, they are not just a public, they are not just people looking for collective emotions, but they are, in a classical sense, a crowd, but in the modern sense that everybody in this crowd stays a certain personality and keeps the personality. And if he or she succeeds to have a glimpse on Rubens, then he or she come out and feel a little bit better or a little bit richer, a little bit elevated, perhaps in the best sense of big, important artistic event and experience. I think that's the case. But at the same time, the behavior of these persons is a crowd behavior.